Welcome everyone to the School of Radiance podcast. I'm your host, a humble human on a mission, here to help you both look and feel your best. In today's episode, we are going to be focusing on thyroid health and how actually our thyroid can impact the way that we look and actually even provide some initial indication that something might be off with our eyes. And we're going to discuss some things that we can do with our lifestyle to support the thyroid, which is very important to do, especially with some of my latest research publications highlighting the fact that autoimmune diseases are on the rise. And that's related to a number of different things that we're going to get into in today's episode, and also some things to consider to support your thyroid before maybe you have even any signs of anything. So we have Dr. Eric Osansky joining us today, and he is a chiropractor, clinical nutritionist, and a certified functional medicine practitioner who has been helping people with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions since 2009. He is the author of the books Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease, the Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, and Hashimoto's Triggers. Is the host of the Save My Thyroid podcast and the creator of the Gut Healthy Thyroid newsletter. Dr. Osansky was personally diagnosed with Graves' disease, and after seeing how well a natural treatment approach helped with this condition, he began helping others with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions. Welcome, Dr. Eric Osansky. How are you today? And of course, what is radiance to you?
Well, first of all, Rachel, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. And so what is radiance to me? When I think of radiance, I think of not only being healthy, but being vibrant. So that combination of healthiness, being vibrant. I mean, at least that's what I think of when thinking about radiance.
Fantastic. And how do you feel around someone who has those qualities? What does that make you feel?
I mean, well, it makes me feel vibrance or radiance. Yeah, I mean, everybody's different when working with healthcare, with people with different health conditions, autoimmune conditions. Initially, some people aren't radiant. They aren't vibrant, but that's the goal, is to get them to that point. So, I mean, when we get them to the point where they have that radiance, I mean, really, I don't think there's any feeling. I mean, it's really hard to describe, but it's an amazing feeling to get someone to that point. And of course, that's the goal of both of us, as well as other people that you have on this podcast, to get people to that state of health where they are healthy and vibrant.
You got it. To make our lives better as individuals, and that so we have more positive interactions with those who we engage with in life. Let's get into some of the first indicators that someone might kind of feel or present when things like autoimmunity, Hashimoto's, or Graves' disease are kind of lingering in the background.
Yeah, and it does vary. I mean, both Graves and Hashimoto's, they're, as you mentioned, autoimmune conditions, and they affect the thyroid in different ways. So, for example, when I dealt with hyperthyroidism and eventually diagnosed with Graves, I had an elevated resting heart rate, I had heart palpitations, I had tremors, I lost a lot of weight. I lost 42 pounds. I weighed 182, dropped down to 140, which was not where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be 182, but didn't want to go down to 140. And hair loss is pretty common, and loose stools, diarrhea. So what hyperthyroidism specifically, it speeds everything up. So those are some of the symptoms that are common with Graves, and also, which we'll talk about too, a condition called thyroid eye disease, because with Graves disease, the immune system not only attacks those TSH receptors of the thyroid, but also attacks the tissues of the eyes, which could lead to symptoms such as, or signs such as bulging of the eyes, cause double vision. So we definitely get more into that. Now, with Hashimoto's, you have either overtly low thyroid hormones, or a lot of times subclinically low thyroid hormones, which means they're within the lab range, but kind of outside of the optimal range. And so you might have still, even when they're suboptimal, you might have symptoms such as fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, coldness. Again, you also might have hair loss or brittle hair. So it's constipation. So I mentioned where hyperthyroidism, you get the loose stools, constipation with Hashimoto's. So again, a lot of the symptoms, I mean, you could get overlap. Sometimes it's not as cut and dry. You might get weight gain and hyperthyroidism and fatigue and hyperthyroidism, and sometimes you'll get hyper symptoms when you're experiencing Hashimoto's. But yeah, those are some of the more common symptoms that might indicate that someone could have either Graves or Hashimoto's.
I'm super curious about this because I first did a parasite cleanse back in, I think it was early 2020. And I had every parasite in the book. I didn't know how good I could feel after I came out the other end of it. Um, but I just can't help but think that maybe there could be some underlying overgrowths of things that then pull our nutrients, increase inflammation, because really for what I've learned from parasitologists is that if there's any form of gut disturbance, so you mentioned loose stools, that parasites could be operating in the background. How common are things like co-infections or co-overgrowths with Hashimoto's, Graves, and hyperthyroidism?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are common yet overlooked. I mean, obviously, if you go to a conventional medical doctor, they're not even going to look at the gut and look into parasites and see small intestinal bacteria overgrowth or SIBO, candida overgrowth, other gut microbes, and they won't even look at diet. But that's where also some functional medicine practitioners fall short, is they'll focus on diet, lifestyle, which is important. Obviously, if you're eating inflammatory foods, you're not going to heal. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's in my books, Hashimoto's Triggers, and my book, Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease, I talk about the importance of the gut and talk about things such as H. pylori, parasites, SIBO, yeast overgrowth. Um, and, the challenge is sometimes they aren't detectable on testing. So I do like testing, but just because you do a comprehensive stool test, for example, and it's negative for parasites, doesn't completely rule out parasites. And I mean, so yeah, even the H. pylori test that you get at a lab, if it's negative, it's not always perfect. And I mean, they don't even test for SIBO in the conventional world. So yeah, you're absolutely right. These co-infections, and we'll talk about the gut. There's the viruses, Epstein-Barr, COVID even. I mean, during the pandemic, I had a lot of people come in with Graves and somewhat Hashimoto's, more so than prior to that. So yeah, different types of infections. But yeah, the gut, there's what's called a triad of autoimmunity. And part of that triad is having a leaky gut, having that increased intestinal permeability. And like I said, a lot of times we overlook the infections and we jump into the food. And both of those are really important.
And there's also this concept of a false negative because it actually comes down to who's reading that stool sample or blood sample as well. So there's also a degree of human error that, for those of you listening, you might not have thought about. Oh, I did a stool sample and it came back negative for parasites. Well, it depends who's actually looking at that sample. One of the things I'd love to pick your brain on is really how can we optimize health even when dealing with things like autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you definitely need to incorporate the foundation. So we just spoke about the gut and parasites. And again, those are important and overlooked. But as I also mentioned, if we're eating at McDonald's or whatever your favorite fast food restaurants, obviously we're both trying to stay away from those, but others listening might still be eating at those regularly. So you want to eat healthy, whole, healthy foods. And there's no perfect diet that fits everyone, but we all know to avoid the refined foods and sugars, to avoid the gluten, to avoid the unhealthy oils, including, again, we mentioned the fast food just now. So definitely want to avoid those. Eat, again, focus on whole foods, organic whenever you can. Stress is huge. I mean, stress, we all deal with stress. And when I dealt with Graves, stress was, I was in denial. I'll say that. So I knew stress was high, but it wasn't until I actually looked at my adrenals, did some adrenal testing, and saw that everything was low that I realized stress was a factor. But it wasn't just the emotional stressors, it was overtraining. I was overtraining, working out, and not listening to my body. And I'm sure that was at least a contributing factor when it came to my adrenals looking like they did at the time. And then the reduced sleep also ties into adrenals too. So not only stress, but getting sufficient sleep. So a lot of people neglect their sleep. Some people try to get sleep and they just can't. Some of it could tie into diet. Some of it could tie into the stress. Some of it could tie into those infections we spoke about. If you have parasites or other types of stealth infections, again, they sometimes could cause sleep disturbances. Toxic burden. So we all are exposed to toxins and toxicants that could be direct triggers of autoimmunity. Some of them could even affect the gut, like mycotoxins and molds have been shown to increase permeability of the gut. And microplastics. Now we're hearing more about microplastics, which also could not, they could act as endocrine disrupting chemicals, so directly affect the thyroid and other hormones. But on top of that, also could increase permeability of the gut. Again, lead to that leaky gut. So yeah, these are some of the big factors that we need to be aware of and really incorporate with dietary changes, focusing on stress management, focusing on getting enough sleep, doing things to reduce our toxic burden. And then again, there is a time and place for testing. Again, the testing, as we both mentioned, it's not perfect, but I do like to do some testing too. We just need to keep in mind that if we do a test, like you said, and we need to prepare for the fact that, like you said, maybe the lab technician didn't read it correctly, or some of these tests don't look at all the parasites. I mean, most of them don't look at all parasites, so you need to keep that in mind as well. And yeah, so a combination of the foundations as well as digging in deeper, doing some detective work to remove the triggers that's causing the autoimmune response in the first place.
And for those of you who have been longtime listeners here on the show, I break it down: purify air, water, lighting, reduce your exposure to electromagnetics, do some gut testing to see which foods are right for you, and then start to do some detoxing. I have my sauna, my Sunlight and Solo sauna right next to me. And of course, reducing stress. I mean, sometimes that's easier said than done with the highs and lows, peaks and valleys of life, but really just maintaining this calm, peaceful, very calculated, intentional, purpose driven demeanor, I think is a very positive approach too, because psychologically, I feel like if somebody knows something's off, right, either they've had some information brought into their awareness, they're jittery, their energy levels have slumped, they're just noticing changes in their weight with their hair. We, actually can even lose part of our lateral eyebrow with when as a presentation of thyroid disease, and bulging of the eyes. Like, psychologically, this can be really tough. And then there's that concept of, oh, I got to get a test. Well, is this going to result in specialist appointments and extra costs and things like that? So that's why I'm such a proponent of just take care of yourself the best you possibly can. And that's what this show is all about. So speaking of like some very concrete things that we could do, we know that the thyroid loves iodine and selenium. I'd love for you to share with us all, Eric, selenium and thyroid health. Like, discuss the importance of selenium in regards to thyroid health and thyroid autoimmunity, and how this mineral can play a role in anti-aging, actually, in general.
Yeah, well, selenium is a cofactor for glutathione, and glutathione is our master antioxidant. And so we need healthy glutathione levels to keep inflammation in check, to keep autoimmunity in check. Also has anti-aging properties as well. So it's not necessarily just the selenium directly, but the selenium helping to support glutathione production. And I mean, when it comes to the world of autoimmunity, especially thyroid autoimmunity, there are a number of different studies showing that selenium can help to lower thyroid antibodies, thyroid peroxidase or TPO antibodies. and then the antibodies associated with Graves' disease, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins. And studies that show selenium can benefit. I mentioned thyroid eye disease, Graves' ophthalmopathy. So just again, selenium is, yeah, I mean, it's hard. We don't, all the minerals are important. So we don't want to just like highlight one and say that this, take selenium and it's going to solve all your problems. But in some cases, it seems like it does that, where you take 200 micrograms of selenium, and if someone has, I mean, in some cases, even like moderate thyroid eye disease symptoms, it could sometimes help greatly. Same thing with Hashimoto's. If someone is, yeah, with the symptoms associated with that autoimmune response, sometimes selenium, again, sometimes alone, but usually you have to do other things too. So have healthy vitamin D levels and everything else that I mentioned, that you mentioned. Uh, but yeah, selenium, usually I recommend in the form of selenomethionine while someone is healing. Now, on a wellness basis, I don't take selenium. I try to get as much as I can through food. I mean, Brazil nuts is a well-known source of selenium. The problem with Brazil nuts, you just don't know how much selenium you're getting. So from a therapeutic standpoint, when I'm working with someone with Hashimoto's or Graves without thyroid eye disease, usually I do recommend selenium supplementation. But one on a wellness basis, just eat some organic Brazil nuts, maybe 2 or 3 organic Brazil nuts. Sardines are actually a good source of selenium as well. So you could, if you like sardines, you could have some sardines, have some Brazil nuts on a wellness basis. But yeah, selenium is definitely important. And then you mentioned iodine. And I mean, iodine, definitely a lot of controversy when it comes to iodine and thyroid health. And the thing about iodine is you need selenium. Like iodine will cause oxidation reaction, but if you don't have healthy antioxidants, like again, if you don't have healthy selenium, healthy levels of selenium, which helps to support the glutathione, that's especially when iodine will cause problems. So we know that iodine is important when it comes to thyroid hormone production. It's also an important mineral. But again, you don't want to take, if you were to take iodine by itself, or again, even as part of a multivitamin, again, you want selenium. Now, if you're taking a multivitamin, probably has selenium, so you cover there. But yeah, so you mentioned iodine, but yeah, selenium, like I said, selenium is a superstar mineral when it comes to thyroid health and thyroid autoimmunity.
Yeah, fantastic. And just a little tip with your Brazil nuts when you buy them. If the bag of your Brazil nuts smells a bit moldy, you do not want to eat them, because things like peanuts and almonds and nuts in general, they get stored in silos and they actually have the opportunity to go moldy. So I don't eat anything peanut based or almond based anymore. I'll just go for straight cream or coconut milk instead, as like a cream or a milk source. I used to consume a lot of almond milk. So just a little tip with your Brazil nuts. Now I've heard about people actually applying the iodine that you can get from the pharmacy on the skin in like a 1 inch by 1 inch circle to get absorption of iodine that way. But what are maybe some of the, and no, this is not medical advice, this is for educational, informational purposes only. If you think you have a medical condition, you must seek the guidance of a licensed physician. But I'm curious, number one, what are some sources of iodine? And another little tip with sardines, I prefer the sardines that are in spring water that don't have any other oils added, just spring water. And I actually really like the fillets, but you do get a lot of nutrients from sardines with the skin and the bone. It takes a little getting used to having sardines. I used to think, oh my gosh, these are going to be disgusting, but they don't have to smell fishy. They can be quite good on their own in a can for like $3, getting about 20 grams of protein. It's a really efficient and cost effective protein source. Maybe just a couple times a week I have some fish. But where's a good source for iodine? Like, do you recommend it in like a supplement that you recommend, or just straight up applying it to the skin to help with the selenium absorption for the thyroid?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't recommend applying to the skin, not because, like, again, it's just because that's just not in my toolkit, I guess you could say. But so usually I'm recommending it as far as in the food and the multivitamin. I mean, it's one of those things. I will say this, and some people with both Graves and Hashimoto's, it could backfire, and like taking high dose iodine could sometimes be problematic. Again, sometimes that's because of the antioxidants too, like the not having enough selenium and all that. Sometimes even when someone is supplemented with selenium, it could be problematic. But I mean, food sources, I mean, you could get it in a multivitamin, most multivitamins, but food sources, I mean, eggs are a good source. Again, I usually recommend to avoid, honestly, I usually recommend to take a break from eggs too. When initially I have people follow an elimination diet. So, I'm an egg eater, so it's not anything against eggs, but just part of like an autoimmune protocol. Usually they're avoiding eggs, they're avoiding dairy, which also uh, has iodine. Again, I eat eggs, I eat dairy these days, so I'm not completely against those. But initially, I have people take a break from them. Seafood, of course, we mentioned. I mean, sardines and things like wild salmon. I mean, you want to be careful. And this, I don't know. I love to hear your thoughts, Rachel, with this. It's a little bit of a dilemma when it comes to the seafood, just because I mentioned those microplastics, and we know about the heavy metals, and everything comes down to risk versus benefits. So it's like, well, we we could definitely benefit from eating some fish because of not only the iodine, but the omega-3 fatty acids and other nutrients. You mentioned how nutrients and sardines are, and also they could help with bone health if you eat the bones too, help with the bone density. But then it's like, well, you're getting the mercury, the microplastics, and again, sardines, smaller fish, are not as bad as eating something like swordfish that has a lot of mercury and probably a lot of microplastics and other contaminants. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about whether you like to eat fish on a regular basis or whether you personally try to minimize it because of the toxins.
Well, I used to love shucking my own oysters and having oysters raw because they're oysters. They have so much zinc in them. Um, but the issue with that, and I was also eating a lot of wild salmon, but it was raw because I live on an island, so seafood is a huge part of our diet. And I think I picked up a lot of parasites from eating raw oysters and eating like salmon lox. So after this initial parasite cleanse, I just cleaned that all up. So I went to sardines, and actually just last night, I have a girlfriend staying with me. Um, she's actually a member here in the School of Radiance membership, which is really fun. I love to get to know you all behind the scenes here and help you out and to live your best lives. And I cooked us some Greek rice and some salmon. So wild caught salmon. I never eat farmed. I always inspect the salmon too, because if it's salmon, like in certain forms of meat, you actually can see bugs in them if you look closely. And I use a cast iron cooking sheet, put a little grass-fed butter on the pan, salmon over top, and a little avocado mayonnaise with some Redmond's salt, a little bit of dill, and organic lemon slices. Bake that for about 15 minutes at about 420 degrees. And then I couple that with rice, again with avocado mayo, grass-fed butter, more salt, and a whole lemon in that. And I usually have salmon once a week. So salmon once a week, wild caught, is a part of my diet. Sardines is great as like a midday quick protein snack that's like pretty time and cost effective. And then I eat a lot of eggs. So I probably have anywhere from 3 to 6 eggs a day, and making sure that they're pasture raised as well. That's very important. But I eat a ton of eggs and actually have my cholesterol checked out. And my HDLs were a little elevated, but that's the healthy cholesterol that we need for hormones. So nutrition is really, really key. But the other thing is, like, I didn't have eggs yesterday. I listened to my body. Like, what is my body craving? What do I want to eat for dinner tonight? Do I want to have steaks? Do I want to have ground bison? Should I be having that salmon once a week tonight? Lots of different things. Mix it up with lamb as well, because we get some protein and then also a little bit of omegas in that too. I really actually stopped eating sushi because of the raw component, and just your body always knows. It's like, what are you craving? But if you're craving sugar, if you're craving sweets, it's probably some type of overgrowth of things that we mentioned in co-infections in the gut. So that's really how I approach seafood, is cooked only, wild caught, about once a week, with the exception of sardines somewhere spread in there, and a ton of eggs. All cooked in cast iron, by the way, with grass-fed butter. I mean, you can do stainless steel too, but none of this nonstick. Cast iron and stainless steel, if you cook it right with the right temperature, I think it's pretty nonstick as well, because we have to consider all these things in our daily lives, how we're cooking our food. Are we getting a heavy metal burden from an aluminum cooking sheet, right? So that's why I swapped all my cooking sheets to cast iron. I just with the hyperthyroidism and Graves disease and Hashimoto's and all of that, like I've seen so many people in my work as an aesthetic nurse, primarily focusing in oculoplastics and ophthalmology. And like the eyes really do bulge out quite a bit, but surgery can be an option to actually apply weights in the lid to bring the lid down a little bit to protect the health of the eye. But I'm a huge fan of what can we do internally. But I feel that in our society, people just want that quick fix, right? Go on Synthroid. Make sure that that Synthroid is titrated. Oh, it's a little too high today. Oh, it's a little too low today. Feel tired, feel jittery. So, like, it's the lifestyle stuff that I find a lot of people just struggle with. But here's my advice for all of you listening is once, like every month, do something positive for your health. Don't think you have to, biohack your whole home with air purifiers, water purifiers, red lights on, all these things, cold plunging. Like, just do one thing positive once a month and then maintain it, like buying air purifiers and water purifiers. There's a cost to that, but what it's going to do is it's going to reduce your oxidative stress status and that overall toxic burden in your body. But when we see data sets like auto deaths of unknown cause here in Canada, doubling essentially in 2019 and then doubling again the year after. You mentioned toxins in our environment. Like, this is just a part of life now. So you can get stressed out about that, or you can have a little bit of peace knowing that you're doing things constructive to live as clean, to live as peacefully as possible in your life, and also in your family's life, in your coworkers' lives, in your friends' lives. And you're doing these things not because, I mean, we're all special, but it's it's not a luxury to do this. Like, it's a necessity now, just with the heavy metals that are in our air, food quality going down because of agricultural practices and things like that. So I'm sure that there's been lots of insights for all of you tuning in here. I've had a few thyroid experts here on the show. What I think is the most important thing to recognize here is that if you do have a thyroid condition, to work closely with a practitioner. And, Eric, you've been doing this since 2009. You've been studying this area. And I get the sense that you pull a lot from, very kind of like traditional Western knowledge on how to manage hyperthyroidism, but then all the other lifestyle stuff that I think is important too to consider. So I'd love for you to share how people can learn more from you, how you can help them.
Sure. So again, I have a few books out there. So two of them on hyperthyroidism, natural treatment solutions for hyperthyroidism and Graves disease, which is now it's in third edition, came out in 2023, as well as hyperthyroid healing, the Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, which came out in 2024. And then for those who have Hashimoto's, I have a book, Hashimoto's Triggers, which came out in 2018. And I also have a podcast as well, and you're going to be on my podcast too. So looking forward to chat with you again. So podcast is called Save My Thyroid, and you could just type in Save My Thyroid in your favorite podcast platform, or you could just visit savemythyroid.com and click on podcast. And then I have a newsletter, Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid newsletter, and you could check that out by visiting savemythyroid.com/healthy gut. And so those are really the main, I would say there are other ways. I'm on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, all those things, but I would say to keep it simple, I would look at those three sources maybe to start out with.
Thank you. And again, I'll just repeat that. It's savemythyroid.com/healthy gut. And you have a fantastic newsletter. This will also be in the show notes of today's episode for thyroid supporting tips. And I just want to kind of end on this note here on the show with our time together that I really like you, Eric, because of your very calm, peaceful, calculated, eyes on the target, like very analytical. Okay, let's see what the tests say. Let's see what modifications we need to make. And sometimes these tweaks, like they sound really simple, but it comes down to you actually making these tweaks and knowing that you are worth it and investing time and energy for you to become your best version is really important so that you fill your cup up first and then you can better serve others. But it does start with you knowing that you are worth it, you are valuable, you are loved, and become your most radiant version and feel and look your best. So if you're noticing those changes to your eyes, you're noticing more whites showing above the iris of your eye and below, that can actually be an indicator of hyperthyroidism. Like, get that looked at right away, because you don't want these things to linger. If you're noticing that jitteriness, are you fasting too much? What are your blood sugars up to? Keeping that stress level down. Because when we go through life with this balanced masculine, feminine, yin yang, right? We live in a world of dualities. I don't care if that doesn't sound PC, but this is just how it is. Like, we need to learn how we can best operate with our physiology, with our genes, and support that expression of our genes, which is the study of epigenetics, to give ourselves and our lineage and our legacy the best opportunity possible to thrive and really enjoy this life that we've been gifted here all together. And it's just been an absolute pleasure connecting with you here, Dr. Eric Osansky. And I'm excited for a number of you who are seeking support for hyperthyroidism, Graves disease, to really check out a number of the very high level resources for you listening. Dr. Eric Osansky and I are part of a health collaborative of some really great people in North America and beyond who, like, our lives are dedicated to helping others live better. And my angle here on the show is how can we both look and feel our best? And it all starts with the inside and you knowing that you're worth it, and then making the decision to take action to create positive, constructive outcomes along the way. So thank you so much for tuning in here on the School of Radiance podcast. Learn more over at theschoolofradiance.com to shop my favorite skincare products with a copper peptide actually I've just created, by the way. For those of you who are curious, where's the copper peptides on the Skin Shop? I actually created my own, so that's going to be available soon. And learn how to apply your products through tutorials, book a one-on-one session with me. I do have limited openings, but I have opened some times up to provide customized skin guidance. We also are going to talk a little bit about biohacking and slowing aging in general. And then, of course, the membership, how to present as our most beautiful, radiant version, regulate our nervous system, balance our hormones, and just really move through life with this more grace and ease, which is going to lower your stress level, allow you to have more peace and clarity in your life as well. So thank you everyone for joining us here on the School of Radiance podcast, and I will see you again very soon. One final announcement here is I have a brand new skincare checklist resource. So head on over to skincarechecklist.com to download that new resource. And if you're already on my newsletter and you want me to send it to you, just send me an email, info@theschoolofradiance.com. You're going to love it. It's a fantastic resource to simplify your routine and give you some extra information to support the skin, which is the largest organ of our bodies. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll see you again right here on the School of Radiance podcast.